what you've done. Don't want a broken heart, and please never let me go. Can we be more than friends just for once? Yeah, you make me wanna try. Yeah, you turn my lows into my highs. Meet me after midnight at your house without your friends. Tell me we'll be alright. We got no doubts into the weekend. Don't wanna waste time just taking by. Meet me after midnight. Let's kiss into the starlight. Meet me after midnight. Let's kiss under the starlight. Don't get me started. I just can't help it when I see your face. Feel you trace under the stars. We'll leave this party. Yeah, sneak around the back and drive away to my place or somewhere far. Yeah, you make me wanna try. Yeah, you turn my lows into my highs. Meet me after midnight at your house without your friends. Tell me we'll be alright. We got no doubts into the weekend. Don't wanna waste time just taking by. Meet me after midnight. Let's kiss into the starlight. Meet me after midnight. Let's kiss under the starlight. Meet me after midnight at your house without your friends. Tell me we'll be alright. We got no doubts into the weekend. Don't wanna waste time just taking by. Meet me after midnight. Let's kiss into the starlight. Meet me after midnight. Let's kiss under the starlight.
Greetings, friends of typography. This is Typography Monthly, our new live show on this channel. And with this live stream, I am releasing a new font to the public. Stick around and you will get the link to download this font free of charge. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the project itself. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them in the chat. This font release is part of my second font revival I launched through Kickstarter. Last year I revived the font Viking, which was originally published in 1925. And this was also a free release made possible by Kickstarter supporters. Earlier this year I launched my second Kickstarter campaign. And this time it's an even more elaborate project, which in the end will consist of 6 fonts for regular OpenType fonts released under the OpenFont license and 2 bitmap color fonts. The Kickstarter campaign ran for over 30 days, but it only reached its funding goal during the last 24 hours. So it was a very tight race. In the end, there were 77 supporters, and we can all thank them because they made it possible that I can release some of these fonts under the OpenFont license. So they can be used for almost anything free of charge. Desktop use, web font use, private or commercial use, it's all included. You don't have to worry about anything. The font family I'm reviving now was originally called Deutschmeister, and it is somewhat unusual because it contains two completely different blackletter styles in one single family. The first Deutschmeister style was released in 1927 at the type foundry Ludwig Wagner. Not unlike the Viking font mentioned earlier, it is a very bold and somewhat playful blackletter design from the 1920s. An unusual feature are the optional double spikes on the side of most of the capital letters. During the 1930s, the foundry added more styles to the family, but with a completely different design. And from those styles I will digitize the bold condensed style, which works well for display use. By the way, at least here in Germany, there is always a discussion around the question whether fonts in that style and from that time are political in nature. And I plan to address this in detail later this year when I release the digital version of the bold condensed style from the Deutschmeister family. The final step of this project will be to create bitmap-based color fonts from the original letterpress versions, which I can access in our local printing museum here in Weimar. With these color fonts, you will be able to type on your computer as if you would create a real letterpress layout. This relies on the new color font options, which are now part of OpenType, and more design applications like those in Adobe's Creative Cloud support this new feature. So instead of the regular filled vector outlines of most fonts, this technology allows vector designs to have transparencies and multiple colors, and bitmap images are now allowed as well. And for this font I will go with bitmap designs. I will take a picture of each letter in these fonts and isolate them so you can use them for typesetting. Since I haven't created any color fonts before, I did some tests before launching my Kickstarter campaign. And I quickly ran into a few issues I hadn't anticipated. The first problem is an issue of perspective. The face of the letters will often extend to the left or right edge of the body of the letter. But if I take a picture of the letter, the face will then extend over the sides of the letters, since the face sits significantly higher. In a font where each letter is a bitmap picture sitting directly next to another bitmap picture, this simply doesn't work. In the example we see here, even if I would create overlapping parts, the typesetting software wouldn't stack it up the way we need it. Only one letter can ever be on top. So that is something I still have to solve. I do have an idea, but I haven't actually tried it out yet. By the way, increasing the distance between the letter and the camera will of course reduce the effect, but not actually remove it entirely. And it will cause new problems like decreasing the resolution of the final image. And with the wood type font I ran into another problem. There is hardly any contrast between the face and the shoulder of each letter. But there is a strong color contrast between the individual letter in the font. As a result, the letters are very hard to read when put together as a bitmap font. With many letters or small letters, it will just end up looking like rectangles in different colors. There are several ways to improve that. One would be to drastically change the lighting before taking the individual pictures of the letters, so the shadows would reveal the face of the letters more clearly. But I don't think this would work well, since with this kind of intense lighting in a real letterpress layout, the shadows would interact with all the adjacent letters. But if the font consists of independent bitmap pictures, this wouldn't work or wouldn't look very natural. I could also increase the contrast in Photoshop, as you can see here. For example, I could mask the face of each letter and then increase the contrast of the foreground or background. This too would make it more legible, but it would also make the letters look more artificial. I could even add digital ink like I did in this example here. This way I could potentially even provide the font in multiple colors. Or I could actually put real letterpress ink on the letters before taking the pictures. This would complicate the production, but it is of course doable. But then another question would be which color to put on the letters. White, as shown here, would be a good compromise because it could be suitable for many situations. But for the users of the font, it would be hard to change that color. If I use a color like blue or green, the users could use filters in apps like Photoshop to target this specific color and change it while keeping the appearance of the wood. But without those filters, users would be stuck with that one color I chose in advance. So I'm presenting all these options because I'm very interested to know what you think about them. If you were a user of such a bitmap font, what would you prefer? Would you prefer the look without any color? Would you prefer the flexibility of ink that was added in Photoshop? Or would you prefer real ink, and if so, which color? Let me know in the chat or in the comments, and I will consider your preferences when I will start to work on this font later this year. But now back to the design from 1927, which I have worked on over the last weeks. To avoid the confusion caused by the two independent designs within one family, I am giving my two versions of the Deutschmeister fonts new names. The older design from 1927 will be called Altmeister. The newer design from the 1930s, which I will digitize next, will be released under the name Neumeister, so old and new. And here are some images using the Altmeister font from the type specimen PDF. And that's the font you will be able to download today. This font was created directly from the original Deutschmeister letterpress font in a size of 60 points. This allowed me to create high-res scans so I could check out every little detail of the design. Often font revivals are based on type specimen prints, where it's hard to know whether certain details are intended and included in the original design or just a result of the ink spreading on the page. But with access to the original font, I could make sure to create an authentic digital version. And here's an example of the scans I worked with. As you can see, there is really a lot of detail in these scans. Of course, I digitized all letters that were available, but a letterpress character set is very limited. So I had to extend the character set and ended up with over 400 glyphs, and the font now contains a complete Western Latin character set and Eastern and Central European characters as well. And here's a look at the entire character set. But there is even more. When German blackletter fonts are used today, there is always the problem that some characters use a letter skeleton that isn't familiar anymore to most of today's readers. As an example, what are those characters on the left? It looks like a weird N, but those are actually the proper designs for the letter Y in a German blackletter font. And what's the character on the right? It looks like a lowercase r with a weird swash, but it's actually a proper X in a German blackletter font. So as with all my blackletter revivals, I created alternative glyph designs which are more legible, and users now have the choice. They can use version A if they want to create traditional German blackletter typesetting using the original character designs, the ligatures, the long S, and so on. Version B, on the other hand, is meant for a more modern use or any international use not using the German language. By the way, I always find it interesting to see how the original blackletter fonts deal with space. None of the blackletter fonts I have revived so far require any kerning whatsoever. All letter forms are designed so they fill the rectangular letterpress body. Roman fonts, on the other hand, create a lot of white space. Think of the space created by all the diagonal lines in letters such as uppercase A, V, W, Y, or the space created by the uppercase L and T, or even the lowercase r. All of those either have to be dealt with through kerning pairs, or like in the case of the lowercase r, just be accepted as they are. Blackletter fonts do not create this kind of white space, so no kerning is necessary. Any character can easily be combined with any other character. But this also means that it is always tricky to create these alternative, more legible letter forms for blackletter fonts, when they are based on Roman letter forms which do create more white space and therefore look like they don't belong in a blackletter font. So it's always a matter of finding a balance that works. Here, for example, the new L is such a compromise, but it is necessary because the original design on the left would for many readers look too much like the letter C with this arc on top, which is meant to fill the white space. And there are probably people who would even condemn me for creating these modernized letter forms, for not keeping the original blackletter design intact. But just because something is old doesn't mean it's holy. Letter forms are constantly changing and fonts are meant to be used. I rather see these fonts in use today because the alternative letter forms allow it than to digitize a font that cannot be used anymore because it is not legible enough. And even the designers of German blackletter fonts 100 years ago were often trying to solve exactly the same problem and to bridge the gap between Roman and blackletter letter forms. So it's not even a new idea. Okay, that's what I wanted to explain about the design of the Altmeister font. I will now put a link in the chat and in the description of this video. The link will take you to our Foundry website where you can find more information about the fonts. And if you scroll to the end of this page, you will find 2 links to download the fonts. I decided to make the downloads available on my 2 typography community websites: our English community and our German community. So you can pick one and download the fonts from there. Okay, and that's it for this live stream. You can use the chat again for a couple of minutes while the outro is playing. I hope you like this font and I'm looking forward to seeing it in action. Okay, and then see you next time.